What's up? We got Stranger Things Season 2 recap. Yes, we are now on to Season 2 of Stranger Things. Last time we had Season 1 and I thought it was really good. It had some really good characters. We had a kill count over I didn't use the kill count for most of the season. But yeah, from Barb's death to popping brains to a lot of stuff. So yeah. So anyway, season 2 starts off with a random people driving by with some of the lab experiment with the people who were experimented by Hawk in the lab driving by. So then we cut to 1984 in Hawkins, Indiana, where we see our main characters, Dustin, Luke, Mike, and now the back Will, all going to the arcade where Dustin discovers that his score has been defeated by a Mad Max, and then Will has some upside down flashbacks but when he comes to, all the gang is gone. Like, where'd they go? Meanwhile, Steve and Nancy are still holding strong. And then we get a new character who comes to town, Maxine, or she'd like to be called Max, played by Sadie Sink. And I think this actress is really good. She has a stepbrother who is an absolute abuser, played by Jason Lee Scott himself from that terrible Power Rangers reboot. Yeah, actually, it's not terrible, but you know, yeah, he has long hair. He abuses her, and yeah, basically the story of them is that, as we learn later, is that Sadie's mom basically married her Sadie's stepdad because she basically had wanted nothing to do with her dad, and basically married a stepdad, and her brother is a jerk, but he's now angrier now. So basically, Dustin and Lucas has a crush on Mad Max and basically want her to join their squad. But you know who's not with this? Mike. Because after them having 11 to their squad and her, supposedly dying at the end of season 1, Mike isn't okay with allowing another girl to join the squad. And we also got Joyce. We also still got Joyce, but she's dating Sean Astin himself, who plays Bob, Joyce's new boyfriend, who basically becomes a father figure to Will and Jonathan. Speaking of Jonathan, yeah, with Steve being from the worst character to the favorite character of the season, who goes to my least favorite character of the season? Nancy, because Nancy is my least favorite character of this season. I don't know what's up with her, but she just, like last season when Steve was horrible, I really liked her. And now that Steve is great, she's the terrible one. Like, that is, yeah. So she very holds herself responsible for Barb's death. Because if she would have known about the Demogorgon earlier, she would have been able to save Barb from dying. So Steve's like, hey, there's nothing we can do about that. Let's get back. Let's pretend to be a normal teenager. Go to the party. But Nancy gets drunk at the party and basically gets drunk, and Steve's like, hey, and she basically drunkenly says, you said we were supposed to be normal teenagers. But this is whole crap. Our relationship is crap. And he's like, do you love me or not? And she basically breaks up with him. See, this is why I don't like Nancy. This is why I don't like Nancy. And then after her relationship with Steve ends, who does she shift towards? Jonathan. Yeah, she goes from dating Steve to going towards Jonathan. Like, this is what people have with why Nancy shouldn't date anyone. Because she keeps switching between who she wants to be with. First she's like, I like Steve. Then she's like, I like Jonathan. Then she's like, I like Steve. Then she's like, I like Jonathan. Like, but Nancy, make up your mind about who you want to go out with, because it makes the audience not like you, that you basically break up with their favorite character, my favorite character, Steve, and then he tries to tell her about it, and she's like, yeah, that didn't happen. You drove me home. And he's like, I didn't drive you home. That was Jonathan. See? This is why I do not like. Meanwhile, with the other good characters of the show, Hopper is basically housing Eleven. Yeah, 11 is not dead, like she'd ever be dead. She's basically being housed by Hopper. Yeah, Hopper is basically housing her. She basically, when she went to the Upside Down, she basically went to Mike's house and saw a bunch of FBI guys there, and basically saw it was too safe to stay there. So she basically camped out in the woods eating Eggos until Hopper found her and basically raised her until she got a fresh new haircut. But then she starts feeling impatient that Hopper won't let her leave. So she's basically like, so she decides to venture out on her own, where she meets a woman and a daughter. But then Hopper, gets scared about that. So Hopper basically yells at her, saying about, if you're not going to listen to my rules, then you're never going out ever, 11. And she's like, you're just like Papa. And then he's like, if you like Uncle Ian so much, why don't you live with Uncle Ian? Actually, he doesn't really say that. He says, why don't you be better off at that lab? And then she basically, he's like, hey, you're not gonna have TV for a week. And then she uses her powers to like lay it down. And then she's like, then it's for a month. And then he's like, let it go. And he's like, then you won't have TV for a whole year or forever. And then she basically just freaks out. And then he calls her a brat, because she's basically being a brat in this situation. I'm sorry, 11. I'm sorry, Millie Bobby Brown, but she was. And then and then he's like, hey, if you can clean up, I'll. So then she discovers about her mom, Terry Ives, and then 11 decides to go and meet her mom, Terry Ives, but her mom is not in the best state, as we saw in last season, where she basically just mumbles stuff. So 11 decides to go. I'm gonna talk about the rest of the season after this whole 11 thing. So 11 decides to go into her mom's mind and discovers that her mom's just repeating everything over and over because back when she tried to get Jane/11 back, Brenner and the scientist basically just fried 11's mom's brain and basically made it so she can never talk. So 11 is now so in the next episode, which is considered to be one of the most decisive episodes of Stranger Things history, called The Lost Sisters, 11 decides to go on her own, and after hearing her aunt saying she's gonna blow her cover, she was just talking to Hopper. 11 decides to go to Chicago, where she finds that girl named Kylie and some other. She meets Funshine and some other people who basically are. Kylie's basically the one that 11 saw in the sunshine in the Rainbow Room. Hanged out within the Rainbow Room, and they're basically sisters. So basically, 11 decides to go and hang out with these people. Gets a dark side. Decides to embrace the dark side, gets another hairstyle, says the word bitchin'. Wow, that was really cool to say. She basically says that, and basically, so Kylie decides to teach 11 the power of the dark side, basically use her mom's anger, use what Brenner did to her mom as a value for her anger, so they decide to go against one guy. They decided to go against one guy, but then 11 discovers that he has a family, so she's like, no, I'm not gonna kill this guy. But then Kylie points a gun at him, and then she throws it away, and she's like, hey, whatever you got, but don't ever go against my wishes again. And 11's like, hey, okay, then I'm just gonna rejoin my friends back in Indiana. So she goes back to visit her friends. Meanwhile, back with Will and the gang, Dustin decides to get Frog get a thing called get a Demogorgon Junior type animal and name it Dart, but Dart turns out to be evil. So so Max is kind of mad that the gang wants her to join the team, but Mike doesn't. So she's like, hey, why do you not like me? And she's like, because 11 was like their mage. And she's like, but then 11 shows up and basically gets all jelly of Max and Mike hanging out. So she basically makes a trip on her board, and she says it was like magnets. So Mike is like, maybe 11's back. So she goes to the door, and by that time 11 was already gone. So yeah. By the time 11 was already gone, so yeah, that's how that goes. So Dustin keeps Dart a secret from the rest of the gang while they're looking for Dart. And then, meanwhile, Nancy decides to shift towards Jonathan to help her with Barb's death. And since he's more welcoming than Steve on helping her, they basically kidnapped by the science guy, by the guys who's helping Will understand his episodes, who are also shady. And they're like, hey, Barb's death was, and Barb's death wasn't your fault. And then she basically tapes it so she'll be able to use this to basically get all the Hawkins lab guys. And then they go to the weird guy who knows about all the theories, and he's like, hey, Jonathan and Nancy, don't you guys love each other? And she's like, no. And she's like, your big worry is about how she's gonna get back together with Steve. And speaking of Steve, he decides to go and get Nancy's forgiveness, even though he doesn't need any. Like, he decides to go to Nancy's house with flowers and say, hey, will you forgive me? But I'm like, Steve, she's the one that broke up with you. She deserves you deserve to say, hey, she should go up to you and beg for forgiveness, not the other way around. But then Dustin decides to be like, hey, you want to help me find some Dart? Want to help me find Dart? And he's like, sure. So they team up, and then Lucas is too busy trying to explain the situation to Max about what's going on and why they can't have her in their party. But she's like, you really think I believe the whole stuff about 11 and telepathic and demogorgons and all this stuff? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, it's just some fairy tale that you guys are using so I don't join your squad. And he's like, if anyone hears you, they will kill us. And she's like, so what you're saying is true. And he's like, that's when you'll believe me? So basically it's a funny scene so then what happens is that Luke's sister is like, hey, code. He's like, it's code red, Lucas. And she's like, hey. And he's like, hey, why don't you code shut your mouth? And then Lucas' sister is like, why don't you code shut your mouth? And then Lucas is like, hey, I told you not to play with his action figures. And she's like, I was just talking to your friend Dustin about how he kept saying code red, code blue, code blue, code red. And then he says, oh, you nerds. So meanwhile, on Halloween, Max decides to join the gang on their Halloween trip, and Mike was like, hey, she's ruining everything. And then Will gets flashbacks to the Upside Down, and some kids call him Zombie Boy because he was brought back to life, I guess. But that's when, so he sees this random monster, and that's when Bob tells him, tell him to go away. Just tell him to go away. So he confronts the monster, and he just keeps yelling at it to go away. But instead of going away, it possesses him. Goes into his body, and basically like possesses him. So Will wakes up on a field with his mom, and he starts drawing random scribbles, and And Hopper decides to, after the whole 11 thing, decides to go into the Upside Down, but gets captured. So Will is like, hey, Hopper's in danger, and she's like, hey, he's about to run a bathroom, and he's like, no, he doesn't like cold. So, yeah, so then he goes to sleep and finds out about Hopper, so he's like, Hopper's in danger. So then Joyce decides to tell everything to Bob, basically, about everything that's been going on recently. So they're like, hey, basically, this is how Lover's like. So when they go to burn the thing, Will gets, like, injured too and starts spazzing out. So they take him to the hospital where they're like, where's it hurt, Will? And Will's like, everywhere. That was a perfect line from his actor. Will's actor nodded that yelling scene. So meanwhile, Jonathan and Nancy decide to, after some encouragement from their kooky theory guy, he's like, hey, you two love each other, so Jonathan, why don't you sleep, if you don't love Nancy, why don't you sleep on the couch? But they ended up going to each other's room and end up kissing. So when they go back to the house, they discover that the device is there that's not belonging to Jonathan, so they're like, someone was here. So meanwhile, back with Steve, at the hospital, Will wakes up to where he can't remember he only remembers who Hopper, Nancy, Hopper, Joyce, and Mike are. He forgotten Bob. He cannot remember who Hopper is. He cannot remember who Bob is. And he only remembers who Nancy, who Mike, and Joyce are. So, I didn't mean to say Nancy. He only remembers who Joyce and Mike are. So basically they're like, so the doctor's like, hey, Will probably has a virus in him, and if you hurt the virus is like a hive mind that's like attracting his host. So one of the doctors like, guys is like, we gotta burn that Upside Down, even if it means killing Will. And the doctor's like, no, we are not doing that. Yeah. Oh, so meanwhile, Max decides to, so meanwhile, back with our favorite characters, super evil Billy's like, stay away from Lucas, Max. But she goes to hang out with him, and then the dad, Billy's dad, who is also absolutely horrible and abusive, basically is like, hey, he's gonna cancel his date and go find his stepsister. And he's like pushing him against the wall, and he's like, are you gonna do that? And he's like, yeah. So he basically goes to Mrs. Wheeler's house, which I first thought that he had a date when I watched this episode. I was like, wow, he has a date with Nancy, but then I realized he just for some reason thought Nancy was there, that Max was there. So then he discovers he's at Will's house, and then Steve, my boy Steve, Riley comes head to head when they get into a fight, saying about how they get into a fight, and he's like, where's Max? And she's like, she's not here. He's like, then what's that? And he sees them, and then they're like, did he see us? And then Steve gets beat. Steve puts up a good fight against Billy, but then Billy beats Steve up, saying, ooh, this is the good King Steve that I've heard so much about. But then Steve beats him up, but then Max uses the tranquilizers and they're going to use on Will to trank him, and then she uses Steve's baseball bat to hit Billy in the groin, and it's basically like, yo, stay away from my friends. Do you understand? And she's like, "Do you understand?" And he's like, "Okay, I understand." And then later, and then in the finale, when we see him next, he's just scared of her now. It's kind of funny. So, so meanwhile, back with the 11 storyline, 11 decided to come back to Hawkins, and that's where she runs into Mike and the others, and Mike hugs her. Well, and then Mike hugs her. Well, she's just like, "I'm not talking to you, Max." Max like, "Hey, I've heard so much about you," and she's like, "Yeah, no, I'm not saying anything to you." Hey, yeah, 11. You just. So meanwhile, Steve is being dragged unconscious, but in Steve's car by Max, and while they're trying to fight the Demogorgon dogs. That's what they call them. I like to call them Demogorgon Jr. So yeah, so at the hospital, they decide at the hospital. They're at the hospital with Will, but that's when the demo dogs attack. That's where Nancy met with Jonathan, and we all. So yeah, so during the final fight, we lose Bob. R.I.P. Bob. Yeah, he gets mauled to death by demo dogs. Yeah, you came into the series as a hero, and you left as the show's savior. So thank you, Bob, for making this series for making this season really enjoyable. Nancy is obviously upset that she just saw her new boyfriend get mauled right in front of her. Yeah, and then he discovered that, and even Mike discovers that Will since the Mind Flayer is the cause, the Mind Flayer is the cause of all of Will's problems, and he's the one controlling the. Will just keeps yelling that he's lying, but then he's like, "What is her name?" And he's like, "Mom." So then she shrinks him anyway. Okay, so then they take him back home, where they're like, the only way to defeat the Mind Flayer is to get Will awake. So they're basically like, they wake Will, but Will keeps yelling, "Get me out of here! Get me out of here!" Even his voice even starts to go all demonic. But then they start having they start trying to get to Will by telling him about all the good times they had together. So then, all the good times they had together. But then the doorbell rings. But then what happens is that the telephone rings, and that's when it's Will. But that's when 11 shows up. So 11 and Hopper talk about how he was wrong to treat her that way, and how he was stupid to basically trap her in that cabin for all time. And when Mike found out what Hopper did, he does not let it go. He basically starts berating Hopper about letting 11 sticking 11 in that cabin. So yeah. So 11 uses her power. They so they're like, "Hey, he likes coal." So Will kept saying he likes coal. So let's turn on the heat, and basically burns the Mind Flayer out of Will's body, so Will's back to normal. And 11 uses her powers to even remembers what Kayla said about using her power, using her anger, and basically uses her anger to basically close the gate for the same gate that she opens up in Hawkins' lab. She uses her powers to close it. So after that, everyone's back to normal. Hopper decides to adopt 11. Good. Into Jane Hopper, but we're obviously gonna keep calling her 11 because I like name 11 more. That's the name we knew her by, so obviously, even though her real name is Jane, I'm gonna keep calling her 11 because I like it. If anyone has a problem with that, please tell me. I'm just gonna keep calling her 11 because I like it. So yeah, so then Dustin decides to take Steve's idea, since Steve told him about how he gets his moosey hair, about how he waits till it's damp and then uses some spray tan on it. So Dustin rides with Steve, and we see their brotherly relationship form. This is a relationship we didn't think we needed, but we didn't think we wanted, but we absolutely needed. So yeah, so Mike is finally called Max. Lucas asks Max to dance. Dustin tries to ask how this girl dance, but she's like, no. But that's when Nancy shows up and is like, you want to dance? And he's like, sure. But that's when and then a girl asks, will it dance? But who are we all waiting for? But 11, who shows up to the snowball and basically dances with Mike. But he's like, you want to dance? She's like, I don't know how. And he's like, I don't know either. But then that's when we see the ending shot of the Mind Flayer. The Mind Flayer is still alive. Yes, he is not dead. I guess that's where season 3 is gonna start us off. So that's the end of season 2 of Stranger Things. I didn't think it was all that great of a season. Like, I think one of the worst episodes was the 11 one. I get it. Like, I just didn't like it as much. Like, Billy Bobby Brown is a really good actress, and I love her character as 11. But for her to, like, tackle her own episode, it just didn't flow right with me. Like it's okay if she's, like, integrated with Mike, Dustin, Will, and Lucas's and Max's storyline, but to have her own storyline where she's just a sole main character. And knowing that we only have 3 more seasons left of the show before it ends, yes, Netflix has concurred that season 5 of Stranger Things will be its last. Sad. Will be the last of the show, and also the Duffer Brothers are also trying to make a spin-off of Stranger Things. I don't know. So Nancy. Nancy wasn't the best character. I felt like when Steve got good, she got terrible. And I did not like Billy. He was also, every episode, I was just yelling for the show to kill him off. Because I did not like him. I was just saying, can you please kill him off the show? I never did that with a character. I never did that with Steve. But Steve turned out good. Billy was horrible. So anyway, that's it for this video. And I'll see you next time for Stranger Things Season 3 recap.